Greetings and welcome to this edition of Bear in Mind. I'm Dan Mogulof from the UC Berkeley Office of Public Affairs, and today we're going to be talking about everything from the campus's financial situation to advocacy efforts now underway in Sacramento. Joining us are UC Berkeley Chancellor Robert Birgeneau, Janet Broughton, Dean of Arts and Humanities, Will Smelko, President of the ASUC, and George Breslauer, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor. So let's just jump right in, and I'm going to start with Will. This has been a difficult year for the university. We're struggling institutionally and individually. I'm wondering what you think is at stake. What's the fight for right now?
First, it's really our education here at Berkeley, and students across the board are seeing their classes at risk of getting cut, programs that they care about, the resources that they're getting back, even services, whether it's healthcare and advising. Just all across the board, we're scared that we're not going to be receiving as much as we used to in the past or that we're putting in. People are looking at Berkeley, and their eyes are on us to see how we react to the situation and how we're able to handle such drastic and awful cuts that we're having to face. They're looking to our administration to see how we're battling this crisis, to the students, how they can handle it and react, and what happens to our faculty, whether they go or stay, and how we can retain them. It's quite an immense struggle, and it goes just far beyond the borders and the little bubble that is Berkeley, and I think it goes across the entire country.
Bob, from your perspective, what's at stake right now?
So first of all, I think Will said it very well. And I've gotten some dramatic reminders recently. I've been on the East Coast in Boston and in Washington, and repeatedly people come up to me and they say, Berkeley is the single most important academic institution in this country, and Bob, you have to make sure that you lead it through this crisis. And of course, we're doing our very best at that.
Do you think, is it about the public character in terms of what's at stake? What is it that you're fighting to preserve and protect here?
So first of all, our public character is characteristic of Berkeley, and it's critical. And the public character manifests itself in many different ways. One obviously is the makeup of our student body. As people have heard me say repeatedly, we have more students on federal Pell Grants than all of the Ivy League put together, and we must preserve that. We must preserve access. We must make sure that a Berkeley quality education is available to the entire population of California. Of course, that'll have no meaning unless we offer at Berkeley the quality of education that one associates with the elite private universities like Stanford or Harvard or what have you. So that means we also have to work hard to have the resources to enable us to hire and retain the world's best faculty.
Janet, you're out there in the middle of the academic enterprise. From your perspective, what's at stake? What are we struggling for? What are we fighting to preserve and protect?
The words I think we often use to sum up what we at Berkeley care about are access and excellence. And those words are more powerful than they've ever been before. And as the Chancellor has just said, how to sustain both in the face of the astonishing budget cuts that we are suffering from is the challenge, I think, for all of us. And I can hardly believe that the state would be willing to disinvest in what is one of the great achievements of humankind.
George, Janet brought up the whole question of budget cuts, and you sit obviously in a position where you have to make some very difficult choices on a day-by-day basis. So when you make those decisions, when you assess where to cut, what to preserve, what to protect, what informs those decisions? What's at stake for you?
We try to minimize damage to the excellence of the academic enterprise and to the availability of the courses that students need. That entails, from the standpoint of my budget, it entails allocations for the recruitment and retention of faculty. It entails allocations for curriculum support. We call it temporary academic staffing, GSIs, lecturers, to ensure that the curriculum is robust enough so that despite the budget cuts, students will be able to get into the courses that they need. And then there's graduate student support that I also make allocations for. And I see these as of equal importance because they are about access and excellence.
Bob, last semester was punctuated, as you well know, by protest, controversy, some conflict. I'm wondering what your takeaways were and how they've influenced your hopes and plans for the spring semester.
Well, so Berkeley has a long history of activism, and I was an activist myself, actually for much of my career, including when I was a student. So obviously, in general, I have a positive view of students expressing their opinions on this kind of a difficult situation. However, obviously, you can imagine as a senior administrator, it's our job to maintain order, to make sure that students who want to go to class are actually able to go to class. And so it was a mixed bag last semester. I think that, for example, the September 24th, was it, March was an extraordinarily valuable one. I enjoyed going out there towards the end of the march and talking to some of the students. As we go forward, we of course have the marches coming up in Sacramento, and we will have continuing activities. We have an extraordinarily broad range of activities in Sacramento, and hopefully they will catch the attention of the legislators, and hopefully we will see a reversal of this progressive disinvestment in the UC system as a whole, and in Berkeley in particular. I do want to add also, however, that in the long run, I think it's going to be important for the federal government to step up for public education in this country if we're really going to maintain the public character of our great research universities. And for that reason, I've also been spending some of my time in Washington advocating on behalf of public universities generally, and I think with some success.
Will, from a student body perspective, I know it's a large student body, it's hard to speak on behalf of 37,000 students here, but after last semester, where do you think things are? What sort of takeaways have you had, and how are they influencing your work as president of the ASUC now?
On the whole, I think what's fantastic is that so many people are getting involved and educated. And I don't think this is, and I know this isn't going to be a crisis that's going to be solved by a couple people. And this is the state of California. It's our legislative structure, how we spend money, and even on the federal level too, where we invest in public education. And we need the public of California to know. We need students across the board to be educated and to know what's going on, to take it back to their family and their friends, and to speak with their uncle who's an alumni of the UC system who can go talk to a legislator in their district.
George, I hear a little bit in what Will's saying is to a certain extent that differing perspectives are important in the midst of a crisis. And I'm wondering your view from California Hall about legitimate dissent. Is that something important, or does it feel like a nuisance and a hindrance at some point? How do you see it?
Well, it's certainly part of the Berkeley tradition that students, staff, and faculty express themselves, whether in strong dissent or in moderate dissent. Where we have to draw a line is when it comes to violence and occupation of buildings that prevent the normal curricular as well as business of the university from being conducted. But legitimate dissent that does not violate those boundaries is part of the DNA of Berkeley. And we don't view it as a nuisance, we view it as an opportunity.
Sorry, go ahead.
An opportunity to communicate.
Janet, I'm wondering from a faculty perspective, has, maybe turmoil is too strong a word, but all that's going on in sort of an extracurricular fashion outside the classroom, are faculty able to sort of balance their roles and responsibilities in the classroom in the midst of all that's happening? Is it something you sign on for when you come to UC Berkeley? What's your perspective?
I think it's very difficult for many faculty to find a balance that feels right to them. On the one hand, we want very much to offer to students the education that they come here to receive. Mm-hmm. And we need very much to continue doing the kind of research that makes Berkeley such a great institution. At the same time, I think we all feel ourselves to be at an historic moment in the history of public education. And how to advance debate and engagement in these circumstances is something that I think each individual faculty member is figuring out for him or herself. I do think that our biggest enemy would be complacency or disengagement. And so I actually take great heart in the kind of passionate debate that we see, because to me that means that we really care deeply about this institution.
We're going to move in just a second to talk a little bit about advocacy efforts and how we take the fight to Sacramento and the people of California. But before we do that, Bob, wondering if you could give a basic assessment of where the campus stands right now financially.
If you look at, we've been working really hard to try to bring our budget back. The reality is that this upcoming year, or this year and next, the state has now devolved down to 22% of our budget. And so the challenge is, how are we going to maintain Berkeley's access and excellence with the state providing only 22%? And unfortunately, some of this is coming from increased revenues from students. And so we've seen an increase in fees, which is a tremendous challenge, especially for our middle class students. I might emphasize that for students who qualify for the Blue and Gold Opportunity Program, that in fact even their self-help level will not increase significantly next year. Middle class students are tremendously challenged. We're going to see a gradual increase in the number of out-of-state students, which I think will contribute positively to the educational enterprise. Our fundraising is going very well. For example, for undergraduate financial aid, Mary Ellen Himmel has led an effort where we've raised more than $100 million for undergraduate financial aid to help strengthen access for our students, and we're very excited about that. And of course, the Hewlett Chair program is going to underpin our faculty and graduate students, since it also provides graduate student support. There's no doubt that we can spend our money more efficiently, that more of our money can and will go into the classroom as opposed to being spent on administrative functions or wasteful purchases. And so we think that we can save significant amounts of money by spending our monies more efficiently.
Will, the media tends to focus on the big numbers, the hundreds of millions of dollars that the system was deprived of or the campus was deprived of. And I'm wondering, sort of on the ground, what's been the impact of the budget cuts on students on an individual basis? We don't hear enough about those individual stories, and I'm wondering what your assessment, what you sense is going on right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, is to put the personal face on how these budget cuts really affect people. I've known students, there was a couple of my friends last year who've left, and they are potentially considering coming back, but right now they just can't afford it. And the interesting thing about those students, though, is that they fall largely within the middle class bracket. They just aren't able to afford the cost of the fees that it takes to go here. And other concerns, which are just huge on the students' minds, would be class sizes and lower division requirements that they have to take for their major, not having the resources, the instructors, whether their programs that they've been in for a year get shifted into another department or under other leadership. And it's tough. Those decisions have to be made somewhere. The cuts have to be made. We have to look at where we can save, where we can consolidate our resources. But in every one of those decisions, it affects people's lives.
Could I build on that a bit? Fees are a redistributive mechanism, and the fee increases will protect the lower income students, but squeeze the middle income students, especially those who come from families making more than $70,000 a year. So we're really aware of that problem. It cannot be fixed overnight, but we hope over the long term to come up with a formula. We're also tackling very specific investments in the curriculum in ways that will hopefully alleviate some of this pinch that students are facing. We had one task force that recommended a $2 million investment in reading and composition courses in order to make it possible for students to take those courses in their first years at Berkeley rather than the last years at Berkeley. And we're going to take those funds from the incremental increase in student fees. And we have currently a task force working on gateway courses. And hopefully they will come up with a recommendation within the next couple of months on how we can increase accessibility for the gateway courses. Because these are the pinch points where if students can't get into the gateway courses, then they can't take the requirements for the major, since the gateway courses are so often the prerequisites for those requirements.
I want to say a word as well about our staff. We feel at Berkeley that our staff are a part of our campus community, and it's very, very difficult for all of us to see what is happening to people whom we have regarded as one of us. layoffs, partial layoffs, increases in workload. These are enormously difficult personally. I think all of us know someone who has been laid off or who's used to be full-time and is now part-time. And I know that there are unemployment stories across the state and across the nation, but to see them in our community is very, very difficult.
You know, Bob, speaking of the budget, Berkeley budget is extraordinarily complicated, and people have said that there's a certain lack of transparency. And there's a sense that before people can get out and sort of mount up and make the case for the university, they want to understand more. Do they have a legitimate point?
Actually, they do. And you might have expected me to say the opposite, but in fact, even for the Chancellor, the budget is really an incredible challenge, and I'm a numeric person. And that's because of the extreme diversity of sources and the decentralization that characterizes our financial matters here. But I do want to reemphasize the fact that last May, we found out that we were losing in total $120 million out of our operating budget. That is as transparent as it can be.
You know, well, as the Chancellor and the Provost know, we are working with the ASUC on trying to put together a forum on budget and finance. And I'm wondering if students really care. Is it something that sort of flies over everybody's head and they just want to know how it affects them on an individual level or a department level? Or is there an interest in exactly what the financial foundation of the institution looks like and how these decisions are made and how funds flow across the campus?
Absolutely, they do care. And one part is education, and that's what they're here for. And that's just another component of them becoming educated, is to find out how their university system works. And two is the question of priorities. And again, when hard decisions have to be made, the more information we can present to students about what we spend money on, how we prioritize our current spending is important, because when we're making these decisions, the more feedback we can get from them once they find out, oh, I didn't know we're spending this much money on this area. No one even uses this. Students don't care. Whatever comes out of that, if it could be helpful.
I'm going to come right back to you, Bob. I mean, I think all that we're hearing is about a situation that's not sustainable. And though there are some glimmers of hope because of fundraising, because of cost cutting, that still our focus has to turn to Sacramento. And it sounds like you haven't given up on Sacramento.
No, on the contrary, actually. In fact, I want to recount a story. I have a personal friend who's very close to the governor and who played a very important role in the governor's budget proposal, which will treat us, at least hardly solves our problems, but at least reverses the decline. And in talking to him, he said, okay, it's time for the students to move from Berkeley up to Sacramento, that we need, that the governor himself and the people supporting him are asking for student advocacy in Sacramento. And so we need students going to the offices of individual legislators. We need students informing the people in Sacramento that this is not acceptable, that the University of California is critically important to them and to the state as a whole, and that the legislature must support the governor in his proposed budget.
So, Will, I think we're really hearing a summons from the Chancellor and the entire campus community to jump into the fray. And as you know, our office, Public Affairs, has been working with the ASUC and the Graduate Assembly and faculty members about advocacy efforts. There's a website up on the California Alumni Association Toolkit, Advocacy Toolkit. We're going to be tabling on Sproul Plaza. Students have the time, the desire, the appetite to get involved, or does it all seem like something that is undecipherable and not worth the effort?
Oh, the appetite and the desire is definitely there, especially coming up in March, where a lot of advocacy efforts are going to take place in Sacramento. And that's been something which I think has been a long time coming, is to take all of our concerns and our arguments and our complaints with what's going on to them, where it really begins and ends. Their disinvestment in public education in the UC system over time is what's caused this problem, and we need to go back there for immediate help. Like the Chancellor was saying, if we don't get to work on solving this problem now, if we face future drastic cuts, I am extremely concerned about the future of our institution. But I am excited because I know that the student initiative and the student interest is there to go to Sacramento coming up in March and meet with their legislators and just meet with anyone they possibly can to tell them how valuable the UC education that they're receiving is.
Janet, a question for you on the same front. There are differing perspectives. We've talked a little bit about dissent, and now in the context of advocacy, do you think it's possible that we can and should find areas of where we do agree and come together? Is there a possibility of unity, that we can take a unified message to Sacramento, and if so, what should that message be in your mind?
Oh, I know that we converge on a vision for the future of the university and of higher education in the state. I can't imagine that that's in question. And I think that the common core of what we need to talk about is the value of higher education for the state. We're asking the state to reinvest, and we need to explain why that's important to do. And I think that in some ways the answer has to do with the way in which innovation in the university drives the state's economy. That's been true for decades, and if it's to continue, the state does need to reinvest in higher education. But I think that's only the beginning of the story, because I think what the public university in California represents is fairness of a certain kind, opportunities for gifted young people from every walk of life. This is part of what's thrilling about being at Berkeley.
One last question that I'll ask each of you to weigh in on. It's always seemed to me that one of the things that defines Berkeley, part of our DNA, is the abhorrence of the status quo. Good enough is never good enough. And in that sense, we reflect the state of California, the frontier state. Do any of you feel that's in danger of slipping away, or are we going to be able to fight through and preserve all that's been good and great about this university, about this institution? George?
I'll put it this way. We have no choice but to be optimistic. Because if we're not optimistic, we won't be able to seize opportunities that will indeed realize the optimistic vision. I think, obviously, California is challenged at the moment because of its political gridlock. California is challenged because of its tax structure. And so we all have to worry about the future of the state of California and derivatively of higher education in the state. When you look nationally at where the future of dynamic growth is going to lie, almost everybody who analyzes that says in those areas in which there are clusters of knowledge networks. So whether you're talking about the Harvard-MIT nexus in Massachusetts, or you're talking about Berkeley, Stanford, Silicon Valley, and so on, that's where the future dynamism of America is going to be, also in Southern California in that respect. And so I think that we have the bases for California's recovery coming from precisely that and being sustainable for precisely those reasons if we can overcome the political gridlock.
What do you think, Will? Is the tint on George's glasses a little too rosy, or does that resonate with you?
It completely resonates, and it's going to be a very long-term struggle. Like George was talking about, the problems are so vast, and it has to do with California's structure of government, the initiative system, everything. There's so many problems that need to be solved, and it's not going to happen within 5 years, 10 years, maybe 15. But the bright thing that I see that comes out of all of this in a crisis like this is that it really forces us to look to the core of what we care about and what we value most as an institution, and it brings out those positive aspects the most.
Janet, I hear in Will's optimism a little bit of a challenge that he's throwing down. Do you think we're ready to rise to it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Will has spoken beautifully on this subject, and I have little to add. I would just say that this institution can at times seem very fragile. It was hard to build. It would be easy to tear down. But I do think that if we remain thoughtful and engaged and dedicated, we will figure out how to make the changes that we need to make in order to sustain this great university.
Bob, that's a lot on your shoulders in these times, and I'm wondering how you're feeling listening to all this and surveying the landscape.
Well, it's exciting, actually, and I came to Berkeley as Chancellor and as Professor of Physics and now Professor of Material Science and Engineering because I believe deeply in public education, and Berkeley sets the standard for public education nationally and internationally. Berkeley's been a great university for 141 years. I can predict confidently it will be a great university 141 years from now. And people will judge us, including me, frankly, for how well we see the university through this difficult transition period. There is no silver bullet, as we've heard. We have to make progress on a whole variety of fronts in Sacramento, federally. Our alumni, need to continue to step up, and we need the community to come together. But as I said, Berkeley has always been a great university. It will be a great university, and it's our responsibility to see us through this transition period.
So I want to thank all of you for what has been an extremely engaging and informative conversation. I want to thank all of you for joining us on this edition of Bear in Mind.